I'd like to thank you for attending session 337 titled Healthy Communication and Negotiation in Mixed Faith Relationships. This session is being recorded and will be able to purchase it after the presentation ends at the registration desk on the main floor. We encourage you to also purchase other Sunstone merchandise and to make a donation to Sunstone to help support these amazing events. This session is 60 minutes long, and we ask that both audience and presenters to keep within the framework of that time so that we can allow everyone enough time for lunch. There will also be time for questions towards the end of the presentation. We invite you to purchase your lunch from the cafeteria 1 floor beneath us following this session. Sunstone is required to meet a food minimum to purchasing food at the cafeteria is strongly encouraged. A little about this presentation. Conflict and disagreements in mixed faith relationships are very common. Finding healthy two-way communication and negotiation can often mitigate these disagreements and issues. Tom Perry has been involved in podcasting since 2009, Mormon Expression and Infants on Thrones, and has been facilitating a Utah County support group for mixed faith couples for almost 2 years. He and his wife have been in a mixed faith marriage for over 8 years. We will turn the time over to the presenter.
Thanks everybody for coming. I also want to introduce my wife, who wasn't necessarily going to be part of the presentation, but she wanted to be here to support, and we worked out our schedules, and I'm really grateful to have her. Her name is Christina, and I guess I'll mostly be doing the presentation on my own, but during the Q&A period, if you guys want to ask her or me or us any questions, feel free. But first, before I get started officially, I just want to say that this topic is very close to my heart. I obviously have been in this sort of a situation for many, many years, and I've been very keen to the problematic areas and the difficult issues that come, bridging gaps, trying to understand each other, trying to focus on the more important issues with each other. And so during this presentation, I know that a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is going to seem rather simplistic or full of common sense with communication and listening skills. But frankly, even I need the reminder of a lot of these issues and how we can get back to the fundamentals of listening and talking to each other. Many believe that being in a mixed faith relationship means that you are in a relationship where the odds are stacked against you. While this may be somewhat true, I want to discuss productive ways to bridge many of the disagreements and divides that exist in mixed faith relationships. Just so you're aware, being in a mixed faith relationship does not immediately mean that the relationship is doomed. In fact, there are many positive things that come from being in a mixed faith relationship. But first, let's take a look at other forms of mixed relationships and see if we see any similarities. One of the ever-increasing types of relationships is mixed race or mixed culture relationships. Close to 50 years after interracial marriages became legal across the United States, the share of newlyweds married to a spouse of a different race or ethnicity has increased more than 5 times, from 3% in 1967 to 17% in 2015. Among adults who are not black, there is a shrinking share of those who say they would be opposed to having a close relative marrying someone who is black, from 63% in 1990 to 14% in 2016. So there is a very strong decrease in family opposition to those who marry outside their race, especially in relation to African Americans. More than a quarter of Asian newlyweds, 29%, and Latino newlyweds, 27%, are married to a spouse of a different race or ethnicity. Those rates go up even higher for those born in the United States, to 46% for Asian newlyweds and 39% for Hispanic newlyweds. This is a very active trend that doesn't seem to be slowing down. The fact is that more people are getting into relationships outside their race, culture, beliefs, political positions, and etc. This is not a bad thing. In fact, this could very well be a great thing. There are so many parallels to being in a mixed race relationship in comparison to being in a mixed faith relationship. And some of the obvious gaps and differences in a mixed race or culture relationship would include family culture, child raising, rituals, traditions. Entering any sort of relationship with so many obvious differences will most certainly cause gaps and difficulties in the relationship from the onset. Now, let's take a look at the current trend of mixed faith marriages in the United States. 42% of marriages in the United States are interfaith ones. Marriages between people of two different religions are becoming more common in every area of the country, and for men and women regardless of educational status or income level. And this next one's a sobering statistic. Couples in interfaith marriages are, on average, less happy than same-faith ones. In certain faith combinations, they are more likely to divorce. Jews are the most likely to marry outside their faith, and Mormons are the least likely. Muslims, Catholics, and Protestants fall somewhere in the middle. Sorry.
Just talk closer to it now.
All right, that sounds good.
No feedback. Good.
I was wondering why that feedback was there. Thanks. Appreciate that. As many as 1 in 5 Muslims marry someone of another faith. A quarter of couples in same-faith marriages actually started off in different faith ones. This suggests not only that religion in America is remarkably fluid, but also that spouses can have a powerful influence over one's spiritual choices. And I really kind of appreciate this last one. Marrying someone of another faith makes you more likely to have a positive impression of that faith as a whole. I wanted to share this just to show several things. One is that mixed faith marriages are close to 50% of the current marriages out there. Secondly, that mixed faith marriages do face serious struggles, and that yes, some of those gaps and difficulties will increase the likelihood of divorce. Communication within mixed faith relationships. Researchers hypothesize that couples with different religious background confront issues that call for effective communication right out of the gate. They tend to develop effective communication skills because they have to, and those skills carry over into other aspects of the relationship. This is an advantage of being in a relationship where there will be gaps and difficulties that need to be addressed. Whether in a mixed race or mixed faith relationship, effective communication is a requirement. This is a very good skill to acquire. Now let's talk about some additional reasons those in a mixed faith relationship should be optimistic. Now I'm going to be directing most of my comments towards those where one partner is a believer and the other is a non-believer. I acknowledge that this isn't always the case. For example, one partner might be Mormon while the other might be Jewish. But for the purpose of this presentation, I want to focus on what seems to be the larger growing trend as of late. Being optimistic towards believers. Fundamentalism is decreasing. Biblical literalism overall dropped from 66% back in 1963 to 30% in 2008. That's a substantial drop. Around 22% believe in biblical literalism. Only 12% believe that his or her own religion leads to eternal life. I'm sure that Mormons might be a little on the exception there. More than 3/4, 79%, believe that even non-Christians can go to heaven. That's huge. Over half, 62%, say that even someone who is non-religious can go to heaven. Over 70% support stem cell research. Over 63% think abortion should be legal in most cases. Over 66% believe humans and other living things have evolved over time. This is a very eye-opening trend. I was a literal believer in Mormonism. So if I hadn't had lost my faith when I did, I really do think that I'd be in the shrinking minority. Being optimistic towards non-believers. Many non-believers are very familiar and have a strong background in a belief structure they already have, and so they already have the ability to empathize with believers. There's normally less dogmatism with non-believing partners. Dogmatism can be defined as being stubbornly certain in a certain position. Most non-believers that have transitioned from a believer position no longer subscribe to being dogmatic in any position. There's also a very large spectrum of non-believers. There's the atheist, a person who is of the opinion that no supernatural God or gods exist, an agnostic. One who doesn't claim to know whether a God or gods exist, often thinks that's unknowable. Free thinker, someone who holds opinions based on independent reasoning without the undue influence of authority, doctrine, or tradition. And then humanist, someone who believes that our highest concern should be caring for each other and this world and this life. Some prefer secular humanist to make it clear that no religious belief is involved, which is interesting because when I took the belief-o-matic quiz that's in the Dale McCowan's book, actually, I've been saying that I've been agnostic all these years, but I came up as secular humanist, so that was enlightening to me. Finding and building uncommon beliefs. There are many things that can be found that both partners have in common. For example, how to raise kids, obeying the law, staying healthy, diet and exercise, spending quality time with family, finding productive hobbies. Obviously, this is just a very short list. I'm sure you can add quite a few additional items between you and your partner. Let's talk about the key to making any relationship survive, but is absolutely vital for any form of mixed relationship. That is open, honest communication. Building trust is so important. And in order to do that, you have to make promises or commitments, and then you have to follow through. Don't be wishy-washy. You also need to be clear and direct. You need to be courteous and respectful, and that helps in all areas. You also need to commit to being non-judgmental to your partner. Allow the other person to explain themselves without interruption or being dismissive. No eye-rolling, loud sighs. Come on, you know how to listen. Stuff like that. No sighs. Be open-minded when listening to them. Go in knowing that you need to be able to change your mind if necessary, or your position. If you acknowledge to yourself that you might be wrong from time to time, it makes it easier to admit error and then self-correct. Reciprocate. When your partner does something complimentary to you, show your appreciation and thank them. Focus on the give and take and make it a 50-50. No relationship, I acknowledge, is a true 50-50 at all times, but if you know that, sometimes the percentages will skew somewhat, and this will prepare you for the difficult times when the relationship will be out of balance. And will also help you find ways to course correct and then bring the balance back to the relationship. And this next one's very important because I put it in all caps, so that's how you know. Nothing ruins trust faster than dishonesty. And then I put in a really nice quote that I actually agree with, even though the guy's tall and kind of a guru. The way we communicate with others and with ourselves ultimately determines the quality of our lives. I actually wholeheartedly agree with that. Okay. Going on with communication. There's lots of additional ways to promote communication in your relationship. This is, again, just a few small examples you can add or take away. Make small talk about daily activities, the weather, local and national news. Ask about superficial stuff in your partner's life, but also be willing to share things from your life. Listen carefully. Show non-verbally that you're listening. Ask questions and don't assume that you know the answers. Share things about yourself, but don't take all the time. If you're a talker, know that going in. And then share something of interest to you or share something you've learned recently. If you do that, then your partner will realize that and actually want to engage. What's of interest of you? Oh, is that really what's going on? Great. Find ways to have small experiences together. Have a hobby that you can both do together. Go on walks or hikes together. Travel, watch local plays or music concerts. These are all great things. I mean, it comes in the dating realm, right? Acquire good listening skills. This might not really affect a lot of you guys here because it looks and sounds like all you guys are listening, so maybe you guys already know. So this might be redundant. But you need to give good eye contact. Non-verbally show them that you're listening. Don't interrupt them. Or speak for them and finish their sentences. I try to not do that to my wife. I try. Eliminate possible distractions. Find an isolated, quiet area, turn off the TV, music, etc. This is also important because sometimes really important discussions get brought up in moments that's really inappropriate, whether it's a TV or kids running around or if you're in a public area. Make sure that you say, hey, can we just hold this for a second? We need to find a quiet place to talk and get this through. Be present. Don't be thinking about something else or thinking ahead or what to say next when your partner's speaking. After they finish speaking, begin by restating or summarize what they said. For example, let me see if I understand what you're saying. Or you said this, is that, or this or that, was that really what you meant to say? Know that if you show real interest in your partner, it will increase the chances that your partner will reciprocate that interest. Things not to do. Again, these lists are subjective, all right? Don't get hypercritical on me on this. Don't try to convert or push your beliefs or non-beliefs on your partner. This is probably the biggest one. This happens all the time in mixed faith relationships. The reason that this can and often does happen is because wherever you are on the belief spectrum, you will likely feel right in your current position. So it will be natural to want to persuade your partner to your way of thinking because you are right. Please resist doing this. Doing this will cause issues and problems. If they approach you with questions about your current position or what you're thinking, then yes, engage in a respectful and polite manner, but never become pushy. This will almost always end in conflict. Don't assume what the other person's thinking. Don't use metaphoric earplugs. Pretend to be listening when you really aren't. Like, hey, honey, I don't think I believe in the church anymore. Oh, what was that? Yeah, okay, that's nice. See, that won't work. Don't be dismissive. Don't point out areas of potential humiliation, like personal inadequacies that you know in your partner. We all know what they are. There's no point besides insulting them and criticizing them if you point them out. Don't allow yourself to be overly selfish. Try hard to control your tone of voice. Sometimes that happens unintentionally. You can start yelling and not even realize how emotionally charged you are. Avoid blaming. Be a little more self-aware about taking responsibility for your own actions. And don't laugh at or mock, even if it's unintentionally. This will require some self-awareness, but it's important because if your partner, or even if it's you that your partner is mocking or laugh at, that can sometimes really cause a big, big issue. Things to do. You need to empathize with your partner. Find ways to really understand why they believe or why they don't believe. And yes, this may be difficult, and timing is very important, but has a very valuable payout in the end. Find ways to validate your partner. Have your partner's back when discussing them with others. This is important, and it might not seem like it is, but if you're in a situation where your partner's not around and you might feel the need to vent about them or complain about them, that will only cause resentment later, and it will translate into your relationship. If you find yourself having your partner's back, even when they're not around, that will translate in your relationship. Focus on areas of agreement and common ground beliefs, rather than the glaring gaps and disagreements. Those are always there. You know what they are, whether it's a disagreement in belief or whatever. And of course, date your partner. Like I said before, date them. If you truly are interested in keeping the relationship alive, you need to be invested. You need to spend time. You also need to find activities that you both enjoy together and do them. Like I said, date them. Allow your partner space. Now, your partner might not necessarily need space, but I guarantee you at times they will. And allow your partner to practice their own beliefs or non-beliefs how they want. You need to be respectful for that. Identity. For some, their belief or even their non-belief system can be tied up in their personal identity. This isn't either bad or good. It's just simply important to realize and understand. Many people tie up certain things to their identity, their sports fandom, their politics, their gender, sexual preference, their music tastes, etc. I am probably one of the biggest culprits of this because I'm a big Utah fan, and sometimes I will take personally when a BYU fan says that they're better than me or whatever. I mean, and sometimes when Utah wins, I take that personally, and if they lose, I take that personally. I've been better, and I'm actually working at it to be a little bit better. Oh, and the music one, too, is huge. My wife likes country music, and I don't like country music. I like hard music, and it at times has been a big disagreement for us because I, for some reason, really tied what I considered good music to my identity. There you go, more flaws on Tom. Anyway, any form of criticism to what a person ties to their own identity will feel personal because to them it is personal. It is part of their identity. So what issues or beliefs do you tie up with your identity? That's rhetorical. I would be willing to bet that all of you have some things tied up with your identity, including some or many that you're not even aware of. Prioritizing what is really important. Ask yourself, are you truly invested in your relationship? And if you're not, why? Is it repairable on your end? You can only control what you can control, which is you. Separation or divorce may be the best option. While I don't think that divorce or separation should be the first option that you immediately run to, I also don't think that either should be removed from the table as well. I don't think you should swing to the extremes. Just realize those are options. Don't think that they're taboos. Don't think that's the forbidden thing, but just keep them in their proper place. Marriage counseling, keep that as a very strong option. You need to really strongly consider it if you haven't already. And if you are doing it, it's not working, maybe try a different therapist or counselor. Are you willing to make important sacrifices to keep the relationship healthy? If not, this is also something very important to communicate to your partner. Strongly consider what could be defined as deal breakers for both you and your partner. Deal breaker. Yeah, Randy, what's up? Yeah, that's completely subjective. There's plenty of believing therapists that will work where they're much more flexible and objective in their approach. And there's plenty of even non-Mormon therapists or even ex-Mormon therapists that have their own biases. So you really just have to kind of wade through the muck and try to find a therapist that will work for both you and your partner and seem to be mostly non-biased and objective. It's a roll of the dice, I acknowledge, because I've been to some therapists that I didn't like. It's kind of a crapshoot, I guess. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, good. Deal breakers. I put the first one as infidelity. This is very, very universal in most books and articles that I've read and listened to. This is the one that's at the top of the list that is a relationship breaker almost universally because it breaks trust. It's a form of betrayal. It's a very, very ugly thing. So I just want to, it's not necessarily associated with mixed faith relationships, but it has got to be very acutely aware of as far as being problematic. Infertility. This is a big one too. I know a lot of couples that have struggled with this and still struggle with it. There can be blame put on both sides if the male partner, if we're taking a heterosexual couple, if the male partner has a low or no sperm count, then he can blame himself, and she can also blame him for the problems of being infertile, and the vice versa for the female. If biologically she can't have children, he can blame her or she can blame herself, which will cause all kinds of problems. Tithing is also a very big problem. We've been doing this Utah County support group, and tithing gets brought up more times than you would think. It becomes a very problematic and a potential deal breaker for many, many couples. Drinking alcohol. A lot of times if the non-believing partner or spouse wants to experiment with drinking alcohol or even using other drugs, especially if they're legal, that can cause a lot of potential problems with the believing partner. Church attendance. If the believing partner wants to continue to go 100% of the time or even 90% of the time, that can also be problematic. Giving ultimatums or being forceful and threatening, and that's universal as well. That can always bring up problems. Kids attending church, kids not attending church, kids, there's a lot of deal breakers or potential deal breakers with kids. Trying other churches, joining another church or a denomination can also be a deal breaker, especially if you're not keeping your partner up to speed of what you're thinking or what you're not thinking or what your partner's doing. Again, that goes to trust and communication. Going to church alone and dealing with negative gossip and judgment. Now, this goes to if the one partner who's going through a faith transition decides that they want to stay home while the other is in the position of going to church alone, being with the kids, and dealing with all of the kind of the word gossip and stuff like that. I know that my wife, unfortunately had to deal with that for a while, and once I sort of realized that I was putting her in that unfortunate situation, I realized that I needed to do some repairing on that end. And then, of course, being overly pushy on the kids, either one, whether you're the believing partner or the non-believing partner. If you're like, okay, I'm going to tell them what's right, and then the other believing partner might actually overcompensate by saying, no, I'm going to tell them what is right, and that puts the kids in a very precarious situation. Setting boundaries. You need to know your own personal limits. Take some time to really think about where your own limitations are. Prepare to communicate in a non-threatening way what your limitations are. Again, communicate. Know that your partner will have limitations and will be willing to consider them, and that you need to be willing to consider your partner's limitations. And you need to write them down. This might seem really simplistic, but write them down. If you're communicating, you get a pencil and paper and write some of the things that your partner's saying. That way it'll help you remember, and it'll also help them remember. Because if they're doing the same thing, it's been proven time and time again that if you write it down, it helps you remember. Knowing your partner's limits, sincerely consider your partner's limits. Even if some of them cross into personal boundaries for you, consider them. That will be a sign of not just respect, but they will sincerely appreciate that. Don't get defensive and attack in response. If your partner comes to you with something that completely goes against your limitations or your boundaries, don't freak out. Let some time settle and then address it slowly and one thing at a time. Making compromises for the relationship, big picture, long term, that's what you need to stay focused on. If your partner comes to you with something that seems completely unreasonable, stay focused on the long term. If you're truly invested in the relationship, that will be where your focus is. And so you'll be able to overcome a lot of the small little indiscretions that come up. Know that compromising some of the limitations will be for the health of the relationship. And yes, it may in fact be painful, but all relationships will require a healthy give and take to survive. Compromising. Again, practice being selfless. Accepting what is important to your partner is also important to you. If you do that, they will feel that. They will also understand that they should do that to you. Make staying home from church productive rather than playtime. This is primarily for the non-believing partner, because it was an issue even for us when I started to stay home from church. You need to have a compromising balance, having the kids or yourself do chores around the house, not making it playtime by watching movies or video games, help prepare lunch or dinner, going on a nature walk or hike, doing some reading or homework. And again, tithing is a big issue of compromise. Allowing the believing partner to pay a tithe that they are comfortable with, or allowing the non-believing partner to not have to pay tithing on what they bring in. These are very common forms of compromise between a mixed faith relationship. Negotiation, kids. This is big, very, very big. Allowing both partners to inform the kids what they do or they do not believe. Kids that reside in a mixed faith home will have a big advantage over kids in a same faith household. You might not think so, but they actually do. Because they'll experience more than just one option of beliefs, because one parent will offer their belief position while the other offers theirs. This allows the child to have the diversity of choosing and thinking for themselves, because children in the same faith home rarely have the opportunity to choose or consider other belief options and positions. This is a huge advantage. It's often overlooked. Something that I've actually noticed in our own kids is their ability to actually consider and think through things through. I never got that being raised in the same faith home. Being willing to allow the kids to choose for themselves within reason. You don't want them to, I don't want to do anything today. You got to still be somewhat responsible as a parent and allow them to choose. Of course, drinking and drugs, again, this comes up time and time again. For the believing partner, finding allowable and appropriate times if one partner is wanting to experiment with drink or experiment with legal drugs. This can definitely be a form of negotiation. Church attendance, allowing for the believing partner to attend and practice. I know that sometimes even that can come across as a violation of boundaries and issues for the non-believing partner, but again, you need to stay focused on the long term and know that you will need to compromise and get into negotiation. Allowing for the non-believing partner to be able to stay home or attend other services. Again, it's not just one-sided. If the non-believing partner wants to stay home, sometimes the believing partner feels like that's a boundary issue, that's a limitation, that's too much. So it takes both people to realize, I've got to compromise, I'm going to have to negotiate in order to find a proper middle ground. So, okay. This one is actually somewhat new to me. A good friend of mine, Jesse Ellis, sent this to me. He calls it a relationship vital sheet. Me and my partner, we actually don't have anything like this, but it has brought up some interesting talking points. On this, you can see that there's different forms in different areas on the form. I made a little pro and con list on the presentation here, where it says, of course, if you want to actually think about doing something like this, you can create your own form to suit your own needs for your relationship. And if you find that communication is difficult in your relationship, this could be an excellent and great tool to get things started talking about real issues. And again, going back to writing things down, this could be very, very helpful in that area. Some of the cons could be that many of the items on the form or on the sheet might not be relevant to you and your partner. If you have your own custom one, you will have to realize that you may have to evolve it, you may have to change it, update it. Another thing is, if you have a sheet like this, it might bring up difficult items at very inappropriate times and may cause unintentional strain by forcing a conversation when one partner is not ready to have a conversation. On this sheet, how much time do we have here? What time is it? In the upper corner, there's calendar items where you talk about scheduling issues. That's universal in any sort of relationship. Money is an issue just underneath that. An emotional wellness scale. This is something that happens in a lot of the Utah Valley ex-Mormon meetings, support meetings, where they go around and they talk about where they're at emotionally at the time from a 0 to 10. Like, oh, I'm feeling pretty good, so I guess I would say that I'm an 8. If you present that to your partner, that gives them the information like, oh, so my partner's actually doing really well. It also informs them if you say, well, I'm more like at a 4 or 2, I'm not doing so hot. That also brings some awareness that they might not actually be aware of at the time. Also, personal goals for the week, concerns about the kids, that box might not be big enough. Spouse recognition, that's an important one too. It's like forcing yourself to be a little more aware of and recognizing things that your partner is doing that you appreciate, because compliments are always welcome. We all like them, right? Yes, your partner likes them too, so just remember that. things that you might need from the spouse, difficult discussion items. This kind of falls into the inappropriate time in the con list that my wife and I were talking about this. Because if you write a difficult discussion item like, I'm not happy with the intimacy that's lacking in the bedroom, for example, and then you circle, then I'm not ready to talk about that yet. So it brings the awareness to your partner. They're like, wait, so you're not happy in the bedroom? But you don't want to talk about it now? Okay, but now I'm aware about it, and now I want to talk about it, and that could be a cause for concern. Okay, and this last bit before we go to Q&A, I don't know if any of you guys have read this book. Anyone familiar with it? You read it?
In the literature on mixed belief.
Sorry. It's called In Faith and Doubt. It came out in 2014, I believe. Del McCowan, he's a pretty prolific author. He's done some really great work. He's even done Atheism for Dummies. I highly recommend it. He actually has, I think it's 7 couples, and one of them is even a Mormon interfaith couple that he talks and uses research and some of the things that he pulled from. It's really well done, a lot of good research. A lot of the research that I used for this presentation actually came from that book. And he gave this particular talk in 2015 at a convention, and he just talks a little bit about his book, about some of his research. So go ahead.
And the literature on mixed belief marriage is nearly unanimous in its warnings. Marrying outside of your belief system, no matter what it is, leads inevitably to unhappiness, divorce, and bitter regret. Now, the first time I read that, we had been married for about 10 years, and I thought, well, that's strange. We must be doing it wrong. We had had a few frustrations around religious questions, but the marriage was never unhappy, and our conflict level was always really low. But I had some atheist friends then, and I still do now, who are married to religious believers. Actually, 59% of the non-religious who are married to someone who is religious. And some of them have had painful and unhappy marriages. Some have divorced, and sometimes it was specifically because of issues related to the religious difference. So instead of assuming that all marriages between believers and non-believers fail, we're left with a much more interesting question, which is, why do some fail and others succeed really well? What's the difference? And that sounded like a book to me, so I wrote it. Most of the authors who rail against mixed belief marriage, I began to notice, were clergy. The vast majority are clergy. And a lot come right out and say that they oppose the mix because of the threat it poses to religious identities, that families who are in a mixed belief situation have a much greater tendency to drift away from a single religious community. And that is a reasonable concern for a member of the clergy. The problem is that they surround that reasonable concern with a lot of false claims about mixed marriage, and that's really not okay. One example is Rabbi Kalman Pakuz, who wrote the book, How to Prevent an Intermarriage. So he has a point of view. He said that, first of all, he does counseling for young people who are thinking of getting married, and if they are an interfaith couple, he uses the counseling session to talk them out of it. And he says that when Jewish parents have a child who declares an intention to marry someone who isn't Jewish, the parents must disown the child and sit Shiva, declaring the child dead to them, only relenting if the child comes around. Very Fiddler on the Roof. And every once in a while, I actually hear a mild version of this from the atheist side. There's a conference I was at about five or 6 years ago, and a guy came up to me and said, with a completely straight face, that he thought atheists should only marry atheists so that their kids would become atheists because, as he put it, our retention rate is not good. You see, I had stupidly disregarded the atheist retention rate when I fell in love with my wife. During the research for the book, one of the pieces I came across was a Washington Post article, an opinion piece by the author of one of these Jeremiads. She, not a clergy person herself, but Jewish identity. And she said, interfaith marriages often come with a heavy price. They are more likely than same-faith unions, in some circumstances, to end in divorce. Now let me repeat that. Interfaith marriages are more likely in some circumstances to end in divorce. This is like saying men named Steve are more likely to get divorced in some circumstances. Of course they are. Steves who commit serial infidelity might divorce more often, for example. But their Steveness would have nothing to do with it. The question is whether the religious difference is the thing that increases the risk of failure in interfaith marriages. And when you consult research instead of clergy, it becomes clear that when there is a difference, other risk factors are almost always in play. And sometimes the difference exacerbates the existing risk factors, but it is rarely the cause of the problem, and usually there's no difference at all in the strength of the marriage. There's a 2005 study that found that, quote, the belief dissimilarity of spouses has little effect on the likelihood of dissolution of marriage over time. A 2009 study found, quote, absolutely no difference in marital satisfaction between people who were married to partners of the same faith and people married to partners of a different faith. But an atheist and a believer, isn't that a bridge too far? And on the surface, it might seem like it. It seems like a problem because when most believers hear atheist, they actually think anti-theist. They think of someone who thinks religion poisons everything, Christopher Hitchens, for example. And when most atheists hear that someone is religious, they tend to think of Pat Robertson. And granted, Hitchens and Robertson would not have made a great marriage, but although that's fun to picture. But most atheists aren't anti-theists, and most religious people aren't fundamentalists. That's why the marriages work. It's really a very simple thing.
In conclusion, I just want to state that, as my wife and I have been doing mixed faith support group in Utah County, even though it's sometimes daunting and some of the pain and the realism is really tough to digest and to handle, I just want to acknowledge that the pain is real, but I also want to acknowledge that it's something that you can overcome. It might not seem like it. It might not seem like it's worth it. You might want to give up. But if you're truly invested in your partner, as I am in my wife, truly invested, then you will find ways to make it work. And just like Del McCowan said, that it's not something to just give up on. And the statistics are changing every day. Even though it seems like, there's too many differences to really overcome. It's just going to be too difficult. There's lots of difficulties in same-faith relationships as well. It's not just going to be dead set that that's what's going to happen. You have to realize it's, even if the odds are against you statistically, that doesn't really mean anything. Each person's individualistic. We all have our own things coming to it. And even for my wife, which if she wants to talk about it, when I was a believer, I didn't even mesh with her as a believer on the same footing. I was much more of a literal, fundamental thinker and believer. She's much more nuanced and flexible, which I love. And that makes a huge difference. And it didn't take until my shelf came crashing down that I'm like, well, how is yours not? She's like, why is this such a big deal? So it's a huge eye-opener. So thank you guys for coming, and I guess we'll open it up for any questions and answers.
I guess if we could make sure to direct the questions to a microphone, if you just want to step over here and ask it this way. Great.
Loved it. Super glad you're here, both of you.
Thanks.
I live in Orem.
Awesome.
When you were saying write everything down, the one thing I wouldn't write down is commitments that you'll never break. Two people in my ward, one said, with counselors, one said, I'll always come and take the sacrament. And then he couldn't keep that one, and it fell apart for them. And another said, the wife wrote down, my number one thing over everything else is that you come to church every Sunday. And the poor dude shows up still. but he looks like he's empty inside. He's like,
Sure.
ugh. And you do what you can. Did you guys move after you changed? I know it was super hard for you because it's super hard for my wife, but...
We actually still live in the same house. We've lived there for...
Okay,
Right.
you give me hope. You give me hope. I like where I
we
live.
stayed where we're at. The only thing we've had in our benefit or disadvantage, our stake recently consolidated and we
Okay.
split all the boundaries.
So we're in a different ward.
So we're in a different ward
So
now.
names
but-
and faces changed a bit.
Yeah, right.
Was there a lot of fallout? How did you deal with it? I know you just said it was hard, the gossiping stuff at church. I'm so worried about that I'm
Yeah,
still
sure.
mostly in the closet with the ward. There's only a few people who I know read Rough Stone Rolling that have kind of told. And how do you do that?
Yeah, it was tough. There was a lot of fallout initially when I did it because I was currently on the stake high council when I pushed on the brakes. And the stake president, he didn't handle it. He started to handle it well, and then he retrenched and pulled back and then decided that he was going to treat me like an a-hole, and that made him an a-hole, in my opinion. But and then I kind of had to do like a ward tour where I had to go to a lot of the friends in my ward and within our neighborhood and kind of have a coming out party to them, telling them where I'm at. This is what I'm thinking, letting them know that she's still around. It was really difficult. Now that we're in a new ward, I'm really not jazzed about doing it again. Like, I've already done that tour. I don't want to do it again. And it was really tough. I mean, I can't speak for her, but when I pushed on the brakes, I stopped. I stopped going. I was kind of a jerk, and she had to deal with the fallout by continuing to go with the kids. And it took me a while, but then I did come back. It was tough, right?
It was difficult. We had lots of different things that played into it. We had some leaders that were supportive and others that just didn't get it, I guess is the best way to put it. They thought that what they were doing was right, ended up pushing some of our kids further away from church, which was hurt for me. But at the same time, they're going to do what they want to do anyways. And I can't really hold much against them, but what hurt most is that you could hear people talking behind my back about speculations of Tom, what he was doing. He's not on the high council anymore, and then whisperings, and then it actually got back to like people he worked with years ago, like it ended up being a family that married, and it was just weird. And then he heard it at work. He's like, "How in the heck?" I'm like, I don't know. It just goes around. I just started to close myself off to it, and those that wanted to know, I talked to about it, and either they alienated me or they were supportive and they were a friend. I actually learned who my friends were out of all of it. So.
Great. Sorry. Well, the current battle my wife and I have, she wants our 13-year-old to start to go to seminary of some kind. And I haven't come out to the kids. I haven't told them where I'm at because I don't want to push the issue and make it big and make it scary and whatever. And the line in the sand for me is I need to be able to tell who I am to them if they're going to get indoctrination camp on the other side, because I knew what it felt like. It's a total pressure cooker for belief. And have you guys had to navigate stuff like scripture study and seminary and all of that? And that's all. Thanks.
I appreciate you asking. You're in a tough spot. I guess my advice would be you do need to be yourself. You need to be yourself to your kids and your partner. And your kids will see the phoniness and they'll see you not being who you truly are. And that was one of the biggest eye-openers for me, was when I first had kind of my own coming out to my oldest daughter. It was a very tearful, emotional conversation. And she actually wrote an essay about it in her senior year in high school. It's one of the most, one of the most moving moments of her life. It was, because I just remember being so scared, like you said, worried that she would reject me, because there's so many things that you're looking at, like, oh, have I done enough? Have I invested enough to make it worthwhile to them so that they won't shun me or ostracize me or whatever? And luckily for her, she didn't, and she was really appreciative and seeing the rawness and the vulnerability, which is always scary for anyone, she actually gravitated towards. And she actually came to me and said, oh my gosh, I have doubts of my own that I've not told anyone. And now I have you that I can talk to about it. And I was like, oh my gosh, can we be besties? It was, I know I sound really cheesy, but it was one of my favorite moments.
Thank you so much for the presentation. As questions for both of you, what advice do you have for couples that are unmarried and have to tackle some of this before marriage, especially if they are engaged for at least a year, so not Mormon standards?
Oh, wow. I think you're in a really great position. In some of our support meetings, we actually had a couple that were dating at BYU come. And it was really cool because to get these issues worked out prior to marriage is so great. And you guys are going to be, if things work out to where you do get married, you're going to be so grateful that you went through these steps before. So I say stay the course, just keep communication flowing really strong between the two of you. Dating and being engaged, really, there's not a big difference depending on how closely you are to each other. Because if you're dating exclusively, it's essentially like a marriage anyways. You might even be living together, I don't know. But the closeness is only getting more and more and more intense. So it's only going to be in your benefit. Sorry.
Well, no, communication openness constantly there is important. But one thing that we've learned through his crisis of disbelieving is that where Tom was 20 years ago when I met him to where he is now is not the same. So keep in mind that even though this is where you're at now, and dating, engaged, and on to marriage, maybe 5 years in the marriage, both of you are going to change. But if you stop talking to each other and stop, these are my plans, these are my goals, this is what I want to achieve. If you don't share that with each other, then not everyone's going to know where you're at. And so when something changes, they're going to be totally blown, like, where did this come from?
Right.
What did I do wrong? But if you're talking and saying, hey, these are things I'm worried about, these are things that I want to do, these are the goals I want to have, then more likely it's going to be better off in the whole long run. Because
we're all evolving no matter what. That's why if you continue to date your partner, you can say, I've been learning about this, or I've been thinking about this, or I want to try this new hobby. They can be like, oh, so my partner's somewhat different now, but I can accept that. So
cool. Thank you.
Can you tell us more about your support group, how you got it started, what the format is, if we wanted to start something like that, or if we wanted to join yours?
Thank you. How we started? Well, I've said this in the meetings for forever, is that I've always wanted to have a support group like this. And my friend Steve, actually his wife Chris too, we went to their house and we talked to them, and there wasn't anything like it anywhere. And so, we came to the consensus like, well, if you want one, then you're going to have to do it. And so we decided to start it. It was on a whim. It was heavily attended for the first couple months, and I couldn't believe the need. It was crazy. I was shocked at how many closeted unbelievers are out there in Utah County. They're everywhere. So we have some ground rules. It's really simple. No church bashing, no church preaching. It's all about communication. It's all about sharing advice, things that work. There's a lot of talk about kids, what we can do about our kids. There's a lot of hurt too. There was a couple that came a couple months ago, and it was the first time they'd said, no, I think it was the last one. They hadn't talked openly about these issues at all. She had been closeted as an unbeliever. And he just wouldn't want to talk about it, but he agreed to come to the meeting, which forced him to actually sit and listen while she got to finally say, now I can talk about it. And now you can actually listen to me. And it was great. And I got a message from her later that they've slowly been, cracking the door open as far as communication in that area, which makes my heart swell. It's super, super great. Thanks for the question.
All right, one last question, I guess. At the end of the session, we just came out recently to a couple in our ward, good friends of ours, and we're like the devil now. Right? So don't want to go out. Don't call us anymore. It's that shunning thing going on, which really surprised me because they were good friends of ours. And I'm just wondering if that ward tour you did, if you think you'd do that again, or if there's other recommendations you'd have from talking to other people.
Yeah. Well, I know some people like send out mass emails so they don't have to do the tour. I don't know if I recommend that either. It's pretty subjective. You kind of just have to weigh your options and then just go with it. Personally, I'm more of an in-person talk kind of person, like with my family. If there's issues, we go to them and talk to them in person. Phone call is the second option for me personally, but I like to be able to read a person and then see them and acknowledge and feel them. We actually had a conversation with her father just a few weeks ago where there was a lot of developments on his end and there was a lot of developments on our end, and a lot of hurt as well, and it was mostly beneficial, right?
Yeah, some good came of it, but it's to confront anybody about a change in religious beliefs, you are considered ostracized. It doesn't really matter if one's still believing and one isn't. You're still good people. You're still who you are. But it's just really sad when it trickles down that we've lost friends. My kids have lost friends.
Well, and it didn't hurt me as much, probably because my relationship with my father-in-law is not great. But when he said that he was really disappointed that me, along with a few other sons-in-laws, have all left the church, because he takes that personal, that he feels like he's a failure as a father or father-in-law. And I look at him, I'm like, come on, man, take care of yourself. Like, my choices, my options, my life, or our life, doesn't really reflect on you. You know, you're a great grandfather to, our kids and stuff like, and we want that. But the things that I decide to do with my life shouldn't affect my parents and her parents and whatever, but it does. It's tough. You can't say that it doesn't, but anyway, it's tough. There's no good answers.
There any more questions? One more question. Okay, time for one more.
So I know you said that you're an in-person kind of talker, but like John DeLynn, you could do this online and people could actually watch and ask questions and you too would answer them. You'd hit a wider audience.
Yeah, there was somebody that actually messaged just a while ago about doing the support group even online on Skype and have people, because I think there's a couple that's in Iowa that really want to be at the meeting. And I don't know, maybe we should do that. Yeah, so maybe.
But some of the people that come to the support group, they come because they know it's in person, it's personal, it's no chance of anybody possibly recording it, and so they feel free to open up and to share what they're feeling. And it's just that personal touch that someone, I mean, come on, when you're done talking to someone, it's been emotional, for someone to give you a hug and say, I appreciated your comments, is a very powerful thing.
Yeah,
and you can't hug someone through an internet.
It took a while for me to build trust with a lot of people, thinking that I was secretly recording all the conversations that we were having in the support group. And I was like, I'm not Glenn. It's fine. I'm not doing it. I'm recording it. But and because it does need to be a safe environment, and that's what worries me about like Skype and stuff like that. Is if I would hope that I could at least build trust with people I don't know, that it's still secure, it's still safe. If you're still closeted and you're fearful of what you say gets out, because you need an open and honest place where you can actually open up. And if you don't feel that way, you won't. And that includes in your relationship. If you can't open up who you truly are, that's a problem, and you need to overcome that immediately. I can't emphasize that enough, because if you can't be who you truly are with your partner especially, then you're in for a long road. So,
Excellent. If we can have one more round of applause for our presenters. Very much.